The city of Portland has declared this a crisis unfolding on our streets. Every night, at least 1,600 people don't have adequate shelter, many choosing to instead pitch tents along bike paths and highways.
You walk out your tent 10 feet, not even 10 feet, you can touch another tent. Every 4 or 5 feet, you can touch another tent.
This week, the KGW investigation, Tent City, USA, brought us into those camps and asked, how did we get here? Tonight, the team behind that project shows us how they gathered this story and the key takeaways everyone who lives or works in Portland should know. From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. We see them all around us. Visitors and longtime residents alike can't help but notice how many tents there are in the city of Portland. Campers pitch tents along city streets, under bridges, in city parks, among warehouses, along the waterfront, in virtually every neighborhood. Although tent campers make up a small percentage of the total number of people who are homeless in Portland, they are the most visible. And residents are frustrated. In a KGW DHM research survey, 1/3 of Portlanders said they have considered moving out of the city because of homelessness. 1/4 have considered moving neighborhoods, and half avoid certain parts of town. A KGW investigation, Tent City, USA, takes an in-depth look at homelessness. Who's living in those tents and why? How did we get to this point in the city? Tonight, we go inside the investigation with our reporters who spent 3 months talking to 100 campers all over the city to find the answers. Joining me now, KGW investigative reporter Kylie Boshi, KGW's Maggie Vespa, whose beat is homelessness, and executive producer John Tierney. He is our producer here on Straight Talk and helped report and produce the Tent City documentary. Welcome to Straight Talk. It's great to have you all here.
Thank you.
And I think it's fun for our viewers to meet John, our producer, who's usually on the other side of the camera.
Yeah, it's weird to sit over here.
So I'm going to start by grilling you first, John. Tell us what the mission of this investigative report was.
So I think you said it well in your intro that we hear a lot from people in Portland who are frustrated. We hear a lot from neighbors who are upset that camps are set up in their backyard. They don't want the kind of criminal element that comes along with some of these camps in their neighborhoods. And we cover that story a lot, and Maggie's covered a lot of that angle. And we also hear from politicians a lot who have these lofty goals about what they can do to solve this problem. But we realized a part of the story we hadn't really heard was who's actually living in these tents. There was a big part of this story that was kind of missing from our coverage, and then we needed to kind of fill in that gap because it's such a pervasive issue in our community. So the goal was to actually find 100 people who were living in tents and ask them, how long have they been there? Did they come to Portland? We were trying to get at that, I think, stereotype that a lot of people come to Portland because we have great services and because we're lenient to homeless people, and find out, is that true? And also we wanted to know, how did we get here? There have to be policy steps and legal decisions and whatnot that led to the kind of situation we're in now. We kind of asked if Mayor Hales' safe sleep policy from 2016 played a role. So we wanted to kind of explore those questions, and that's where we're
Maggie, do you feel
started.
like you accomplished the mission that you set out to do?
We definitely did. I think, you know, the tent camper population is such a distinct portion of our homeless population, of that demographic. And up until this point in the point in time count, which the county does now every year, it used to be every 2 years, they didn't count tents. They counted the technically unsheltered, which means you're literally sleeping somewhere night after night or on any given night. That's not meant to be a shelter. It could be outside, it could be in a car, it could be in a doorway, or it could be in a tent. But those who are living in tents, you know, that's a really visual, jarring representation of our city's homeless crisis. It's the thing that most people now are writing to us about, as you know, and it's what they now think of a lot of times, unfortunately, when they think of Portland's homeless crisis. So really drilling down to that specific portion of this population was important. It wasn't something that we had done from a larger standpoint, just kind of getting our arms around the problem. And then again, looking at how we got here and what had led up to it really before everybody sort of noticed the crisis in this big way was really gratifying. I think we definitely accomplished it.
Kyle, this was your idea to do this. Tell us about the process, how you went about gathering this information.
Right, well, we knew we wanted to tackle the issue of homelessness, and then we narrowed in on tents specifically because it is so visible. So we developed this survey, basically 5 questions that we could go out in the field and interview people living in tents. And we use that, one, to gather data, to really kind of get a better understanding of who these people are and why they're here. But it was a starting point to a conversation with those people living in tents, to talk to them, and at length in many cases, to get a better understanding of their story and their struggle.
Well, let's take a look at a clip from the part that you did at the beginning on Tent City, USA.
How long have you been living in a tent?
About a year.
This ain't as easy as most people think. It ain't.
It's not camping.
No, it's not. Not even close. I love going camping, and this just ain't it. This ain't camping at all.
Why do you live in a tent versus other sheltered locations?
Because I don't like shelters. They're dirty, they're gross, they're just not sanitary. I mean, I like having my own space and living with my significant other. Shelters, you can't stay with your significant other. Tents it's like my own space, secluded. I can do my own thing. I have my own, I don't have a given amount, a certain time where I have to be in somewhere.
A shelter, I can't go because of my dogs, and I'm not willing to give my animals up. My animals are like family to me. I'm not willing to give them up for somebody to be in a shelter. This spot, 2 days here.
Kyle, I'm curious about the reception you got when you went to the tents.
Right.
Were you afraid people might not want to talk to you?
Well, we were really concerned at the get-go. We didn't know what kind of reception we'd get. We talked about, do we need security? Should we go out in teams of 2, 3, 4 people? Should we take a camera? But it quickly became apparent these people actually did want to talk to us, and they were very welcoming. When we arrived, they said, yes, we'd be happy to tell our story. And I think for a lot of these people, it was an opportunity they normally don't have. They feel invisible, like people don't look at them and want to avoid any contact. So to have somebody come into their encampment and say, hey, I want to talk to you, I want to hear your story, it's pretty important to these people.
Or they feel all too visible. Like one woman told us, I feel like a zoo animal. People drive by, they see me, and they form these opinions about who I am and why I'm here without ever having talked to me. So it was a point to kind of set their own story straight, an opportunity for them.
You gave them face and a voice. And John, you told me that of the 100 people that you all met, that you know the names of all these faces.
Yeah, we had this collage we built of all these faces, and when we were watching at the end, I'm like, oh yeah, that's Gypsy. We met him. He was here. Or there's Willow, who a woman Maggie spent a bunch of time with. I was like, we know where she was living. She was living in I think Woodstock near 205 kind of area. And so, I was surprised, like we all were, kind of how receptive they were. We thought maybe 50% of people when we walked in these camps would be willing to participate in our survey, and the number was much higher than that about people who are willing to talk to us. And I think it is because their voices aren't generally heard, and they want their voices to be heard. These are not, they're just like anyone else. They have kind of wants and needs, and like any person wants to feel like they're a part of a community and part of a broader community. And just because you're living in a tent doesn't mean that you don't have those same wants and desires as anyone else. And you want to tell your story.
Maggie, do you feel like you came away with a better understanding of people who were living in tents?
I do. I think, it's like I said, I've covered this for a while, and so I felt like I had a pretty good understanding, at least, more than the average person going into it. But the thing that really struck me, John talked about Willow, we spent days with somebody. That's not something that a normal dayside reporter, meaning you start at 9 a.m., you have your story on TV by 4, gets to do. And so just staying with Willow and thinking about, okay, I have to take my dog to the vet. How arduous of a task is that going to be? How long is that really going to take?
Let's talk about Willow. She's homeless because she told you her life and business in California fell apart after her husband died. She also has epilepsy. So let's listen to part of your story that you did on Willow from Tent City, USA.
Weekly seizures leave her tired and confused. She lives off of disability, roughly $700 a month.
It would take all of my check to pay rent.
Yeah.
And then I would have nothing to live on at all.
10 a.m. We're at the Mac stop.
I'll be right back.
Break time.
I got a brand new pair of whiskey. You got a brand new key. I think that we should get together, try them out to see.
It's crazy to think about. All she's trying to do is get eye cream for her dog. Her dog's had this eye infection on and off for a year, and she blocked out like 4 hours of her day for this one errand. For most of us, we take our dog to the vet maybe an hour, hour and a half. You can do it on your lunch break. For her, this is her day. And it might not even work because it depends on if the clinic has time.
Pretty powerful story. What kind of reaction have you gotten since that aired?
Oh, I just talked to Willow on the phone the other day, and she said, I mean, I think her reaction really sums it up. She said people are running up to her on the streets and saying, I saw you on TV. How are you? How's Luna, who was her dog? And I said, everybody who saw you seemingly connected with you in some way, whether or not it's because she battles epilepsy on a near at this point daily basis, at least once a week, whether or not it's that she had a dog who she couldn't take care of on that day, even though her main priority does seem to be her dog, or she's a mom who has 2 grown kids who know that she's homeless but aren't in a place where they can help her. So putting her story out there and just kind of letting everybody take a breath and watch her day and realize how tough it really is just survive day after day after day on the streets, I think was really powerful, and I'm glad we did it.
I think there's like 2 important takeaways from Willow's story too. One is you heard her mention that her disability check is $700 a month. Maybe a time 8, 9 years ago, 7 years ago in Portland where $700 a month would get her like a room she could rent and still have a little bit of money left over. That's just not the case anymore. You know, rents have gone up so much, but her disability and her Social Security check hasn't. So I think there's a lot of people we talk to who find themselves in that situation. They can't work for some reason, and the check that they get just doesn't cover even putting a roof over their head. And second, you know, she's 56. She's on the older end of people that are generally on the streets, but you know, we've heard from a lot of people we talk to that there's going to be more older folks living on the streets, more baby boomers who are retiring, don't have a retirement saved up, you know, to afford living in Portland. And so we're going to see more and more of that. That's one of the follow-up stories we're actually working on, is about baby boomers who are going to end up on the street. But
a common thread, Kyle, from your investigation was that people say they've been here for years, but why does it seem like we're seeing so many more tents?
Well, they are visible. That's a big thing. Is, you know, we've always had homelessness in Portland here, but now these tents are on sidewalks, in parks, throughout the city. And so we suddenly see them, and people can feel it. And, you know, there obviously are some other challenges that have come up as well. There have been some legal settlements and the safe sleep policy that have helped kind of create some confusion as well as far as interpretation of the law and misinterpretation of the law. In talking to the people who are living in these tents, they really don't understand what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do.
Well, let's take a look at that, because you did look at that in the investigation, how we got to where we are. So here's another look from Tent City, USA.
It's just something so out of place, and it scares people. I just think it's that simple. It's just not normal. And tents in a campground, normal. You know, tents along a bike path, not.
So at what point did we open the floodgates and people really begin setting up tents?
I think probably end of 2014, things started getting rapidly, depending on your perspective, getting worse or more people.
That's around the time that Portland was implementing rules required by a federal lawsuit known as Anderson versus the City of Portland. It would totally change the way the city deals with homeless, especially police. They had to post a notice at least 24 hours in advance of moving a camp. Camps couldn't be cleared at night, and police had to catalog and store any confiscated property. It protected the legal rights of campers, yes, but it slowed down the process of moving troublesome camps.
John, you took a lead on researching this part of it. Were you surprised by what you learned about how we got to where we are today?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that there was a lot of challenges and that it was really complicated. It's not as simple for police to just go out and say, there's a camp. Now, it's not supposed to be here. Let's just kick it out and, you know, take all the stuff and either store it somewhere or throw it away. There's a lot more to it than that. But I was surprised at kind of the complexity and how deep various legal settlements, court settlements, federal court rulings from different states in the West, from the Ninth Circuit, laws that were passed in Oregon that give homeless people kind of a protected class in the same way that you know, you have a protected class based on your race or sexual orientation. So basically a police officer can't stop someone solely because they're homeless. You have to have some other probable cause of a crime besides just the fact they're living on the street. There's a myriad reasons that why officers can't kind of, I think a lot of people think they're not enforcing the laws. That sergeant we interviewed there, Sergeant Randy Teig, you know, he and his team of 4 officers, that's their whole their whole 40-hour-a-week job is just enforcing and dealing with livability issues. And nowadays, that's almost entirely related to dealing with issues from homeless camps. And they're just in East Precinct. There's similar teams in Central Precinct and North Precinct. But he's got like a 45-page guide he's written cataloging all of these legal decisions, all of these rules, all of these laws that he actually hands out to neighborhood groups. So when he's in these meetings and upset neighbors go, I just wish you would enforce the laws. He goes, I am enforcing the law. I want to enforce the law. You need to understand that it's not as simple and it's not as cut and dry. I mean, in general, there's very few issues that we face that are as complicated or as nuanced as dealing with homelessness. I think it's important. You know, our goal, part of this whole story, was to help people understand that it's not just an issue of a lack of will.
One of the things that stirred some controversy about your investigation was the title of it, Tent City, USA, and Mayor Wheeler went on the offensive just before your documentary ran on Monday. On Friday, he held a news conference saying he didn't like the title and why. So let's listen to what he said at the news conference, and I'll get your reaction.
So it raises a question. Is Portland worse off than other cities? Is Portland really Tent City, USA? I want to be clear. The answer is no. While the homeless situation in Portland is significant and unacceptable, it is not unique. That's what the data shows us.
So Kyle, why the title Tent City, USA? Is that a fair title?
Well, to be clear, we're not looking to rebrand the city of Portland as Tent City, USA. Really, this title reflects the issue and the problem that we're dealing with now that is citywide. These tents are visible. They're all over.
People can't help but see them all over the city. Do you have some thoughts on that, Maggie?
Right, it strikes visitors when they come into town. You know, all of us, just like everybody in Portland, seemingly you have friends and family that come visit, and they've been to other cities up and down the West Coast, but it still hits them as they're driving into the city of Portland. It's also something that Portlanders feel really passionately about. You know, I was at that news conference. I sat across from Mayor Wheeler at that table and was listening to him walk through, which must have been very awkward for other reporters who aren't a part of our documentary, why he had a problem with KGW's title. At the end of the day, though, Portlanders, a lot of them, from what we heard afterward, aren't comfortable hanging their hat on Portland compared to LA or Portland compared to San Francisco or compared to Seattle. They care about Portland, their hometown, how it's handling this crisis, and to them, these tents are jarring and they're troubling to see day after day. So a lot of it was also about the perception that people have of their hometown.
Maggie, John, Kyle, we need to take a break, but when we come back after the documentary, we had a roundtable discussion on steps the city might take to end homelessness. We'll look at what's next after the break. We're back in 2 minutes.